Our program is numerous, but the organization itself is a multidisciplinary arts organization that we are dedicated to the promotion, exhibition, and development of Indigenous arts and artists. One program that has been successful over the last few years has been InRes, which is a residency that developed out of a partnership with the North American Indigenous Games in 2014. And it paired established artists from Saskatchewan with students from the First Nations University of Canada, Indigenous artists, all Indigenous artists, and they worked together for about a month to come up with a performance that was a timeline from pre-colonial days to the present, and it was about 15 minutes long, and it was delivered just before A Tribe Called Red played at the closing ceremonies of the games. So the following year was a legacy project where we actually brought back the mentees, the younger group of students back, and they were now the mentors for a new group. And in 2016, InRes 2016 was our answer to Canada's 150th. So they responded, the question that was posed to them was, where do you see Canada's relationship with Indigenous people in the next 150 years, or 150 years from now? And it culminated with primarily visual arts, but also a final exhibition where more other artists were exhibited, and it was premiered at the First Nations University of Canada. Then it went to the Lobby Gallery, also here in Regina, and then it went to Wanuskewin Heritage Park and their galleries. And in 2017, it switched gears to a very small screenwriting program, and individuals in that program wrote their own screenplays by a local artist who had just finished his MFA in screenwriting at the American Indian Arts Institute. And that is one program that we look to maintain. Another one, an annual thing, is our Storytellers Festival, which happens in February of every year. A time for storytelling and knowledge sharing in a traditional sense. Also, it's as an opportunity to premiere works by our own collective, members of the community, members of the collective, and we always try to bring in recognizable names to share their stories through the art, through visual arts, through traditional storytelling. We've had plays, we've had table reads, we've had spoken word. There's always a music component. We had DJ Shub last in 2018. So that is another broad week-long to a month-long celebration of arts and culture. This year we're changing gears to be a little more focused, and we hope to maintain those programs as well as participation with the First Nations University of Canada powwow in April. We skipped Indigenous Peoples Day this year, but that's another opportunity. And there's Art Now, which is an annual exhibition for commercial galleries out of SAS Galleries, it's called. And that's all I can think of right now. But there's only a handful of things we want to focus on and really bring it, really make it a big deal for everyone that gets involved. Hopefully we have funds to maintain things on the fly. Like I mentioned, we have an operational plan with programs that we try to maintain. But then we have the goals of our artists that we work with in the community. So a lot of them are students, like college, university level. Some of them are in high school. So some of them they come with particular needs and goals, which sometimes involve them applying for a grant, or there are also grants that Sakewewak is eligible for as a nonprofit, and we would take those artists in with their program or project idea and incorporate it into what we're doing, and most of the time those are aimed at youth, Indigenous or otherwise. It's an opportunity to share that knowledge and this perspective going into arts, and that sort of sharing. So it is an interesting. I notice there's this thing is probably looked at to be somewhat structured, but the nature of an artist run center is that it has to be an open ended, dynamic space to be able to accommodate many other ideas around arts and projects that engage the community. And I think a good chunk of my job is communications with potential partners for gallery space, for workshop space, theater space, also the funding. Um, yeah, it's very fulfilling work, but unfortunately, there isn't very much consistency amongst the programming. So I'm always on my toes. An easy way to look at it, I suppose, is getting Indigenous artists paid for their work, whatever it is that may be. So the Storytellers Festival is its own entity in a way that we contract artists to perform. They come in, they perform, they engage a broad community in that sense, and then with particular projects, the goal is a bit different. It involves more work out of the artists. So it's more self-directed. It's definitely something that I'm working with the community and the artists to accomplish, but I leave it to the artists to get the work done on their own. It's definitely something I don't want to be, because if I do too much, then I think it's more my job or my thing as an artist. I definitely want to stay at an arm's length. Those are some primary objectives that I try to keep in mind, and keeping that established with the artists. A visual arts exhibition is also a different beast on its own. It involves some transportation of the works and the handling, engaging in volunteers in these different ways, and and that's another component that is I see Sakewewak filling, is especially when it comes to university level arts artists and students. They're learning one thing in their degree programs, which is very specific, in their own practice or their writing, but there really isn't too much, I guess, in the practical sense that prepares them for work afterwards. This is where Sakewewak and other nonprofits like Sakewewak, like artist run centers, are able to fill in those gaps. So training them to prepare a gallery space, it takes some knowledge around tools and such. They also program development, working in a public areas, actually engaging people outside of your community. It helps develop the artists as well, and at the same time enriching the community. I think the real successes in our programming have to do with how the artist leaves and what they've gained, whether it's something physical that they were challenged to create, or they came in wanting to test themselves in a different sort of venue, say going into schools and working with youth. So it really is varied. I wish I had a more solid answer, but I think as long as the artist is satisfied and the community that they're engaging has learned something that they can take away, I think that is really all that we have to go by. From my perspective, Indigenous education is sometimes it's more than being led by a person who is Indigenous. It's more holistic. So if we can get an Indigenous artist into a classroom to speak about their experiences and share that with a group that hasn't heard those things before, I think that is one example. And I suppose the way my goals are also to force people out of their comfort zones, where we all are in our families and our community, and placing them in other spaces, but also finding a way for the project, the program, to connect with elders, other knowledge keepers in the community or from other communities, and if we can, get them out into the land and experience what we have here and available in Saskatchewan, in Regina. Sometimes that is a more cooperative thing with another group, and that is another success when partnerships are developed and they carry on. They are not one-offs. But that is another thing that's important to me, is avoiding Sakewewak being what it is and catering to Indigenous artists all the time in that community. We aren't there to help other organizations when they're in need of that community. Whatever we're doing moving forward, we definitely want it to be long-lasting and sincere. It is kind of a miserable spot. I mean, there are some ups and downs. I'm 43 years old, and I am, I can't say it often enough how privileged I am to be in this position, to be working with our community and helping out and getting artists, our artists exposed and bringing them in from other communities. But by and large, a lot of it feels like it's kind of the same over and over. With this interconnectedness that the internet brings, it seems there are communities that are even further divided. And it's interesting when we get into these proposals and projects, we want to affect change and help certain communities and grow. But there's a point where you reach where you're only addressing those people within the same sort of arts appreciative community. So I guess in 10 years, I hope that things are more integrated in a more positive way that is accepting of Indigenous cultures and our perspectives and our stories. The hard stories. There's a lot of denial out there, by and large, by Canada and Canadians. And there's also this imagery that I think exists, that Canada is some sort of utopia amongst itself. Again, so Sakewewak is an organization, as I said, dedicated to Indigenous arts development exhibition. And along with this sense of Canada that people have, where everything's awesome, the Sakewewak, if it were that way, Sakewewak is an organization that wouldn't need to exist. If Indigenous people and Indigenous artists had access to post-secondary education in higher rates, if these artists were able to access venues such as more commercial galleries, if festivals and other events integrated Indigenous people and artists and our culture into those things, we wouldn't have to exist. So we're in our 23rd year, and it's kind of it. I forget when I came to this conclusion, but it was fairly recently that it's something that just shouldn't exist. So 10 years, I can see Sakewewak still being there and playing a role in the community and getting Indigenous artists out and out there and doing their work. But I think eventually it's something that, if it's a happy utopia dream world one day, it won't be needed. And so we are actually one of 3 Indigenous artist-run centers in the province. We are one of 4 in all of Canada. So that sort of states, if there's 3 of these Indigenous artist-run centers in one province and one in another province, that sort of speaks to where the issues, where the needs are nationally. This is something that really it shouldn't exist, but here we are. And it is appreciated. Our partners, we have very strong partnerships in the community with major galleries and other organizations. And it's something that should carry on, but in 10 years, I think we will still be here, doing what we're doing. I think the successes of the in recent years have revolved around the partnerships. So that has had a lasting effect. It actually saves us a lot of funding. We should be spending in advertising and marketing. This is what we do. This is who we are. Um, it's these avenues that really help with communications and exposure. So I think that access to media to be impactful really is what it's about. As long as our programming and what we're doing contributes to a provincial, regional, and a national dialogue within the arts community, that we can maintain on our own these successes into the future.